So I want to talk a little bit about the history of the Appalachian Trail. So that's the trail that I was hiking a couple weeks ago. And it is the oldest continuous footpath and the long footpath in the world. And it started out back in the teens and the 20s. A gentleman named Benton Mackay, who was kind of a Ivy League sort of ivory tower kind of dude. And he had this vision for kind of a wilderness retreat to get people out of this increasing urbanization that was happening at the time. And he married a suffragette who was very active in the women's movement at the time to get women the vote. And because of her activity, she got very, very worn out and very depressed. And he decided they should take a little vacation out into the countryside. And they went down to New York to get on a train to go out in the country. And the night before, she left the hotel, walked out to the East River Bridge and jumped off of it. So he was very affected by this. You could imagine just in his grief, came up with this idea for a long distance trail where people could really retreat and seek solace and seek their selves and seek nature. So that he was kind of this visionary guy. And but not much really happened. He had the plans, he had everything on paper. But two gentlemen, Arthur Perkins and Myron Avery, are the ones that really made it happen. And they took his vision and said, look, we've got to make this happen. We've got to make a trail, and we've got to build shelters along that trail, because at the time, the tents were like 10 pounds of canvas. So people didn't exactly like to backpack and carry all their equipment with them. It was really too heavy. So the idea was to build shelters and allow people to get out and hike and be able to take shelter in these structures. And they also formed these local clubs and got volunteers involved in helping to build that trail and to maintain it. And so by 1937, through a lot of pulling strings from Myron Avery, he had a lot of cooperation from the government. So he had to do some compromises with that just to make so that he wouldn't lose support from the government. And there was a depression at the time. So a lot of this trail was built by Roosevelt's Conservation Corps. And a lot of these shelters were built by the CCC. And in any case, it was completed in 1937. And so then they had a trail, and most people just hiked portions of the trail that were near their house. And it wasn't really till after World War II that someone came up with the idea of let's hike the whole thing. And it was a veteran who came home from the war, and again was kind of shell-shocked or at PTSD, as we'd call it today, and needed to have some solace, some respite, some kind of return to finding himself again. And he said, I'm going to just get out and walk this trail. So he walked the whole thing from Georgia to Maine, and he was the first person to do it. He did it a couple more times in his life as well. And then as more people started to hike this trail, and more people began to populate the area around the trail, the idea was, well, this trail won't be what we envisioned it to be, which is kind of a retreat from urbanization, if factories and farms and big towns sprout up all around it. And so the idea was, well, how could we protect this trail? Is it just a trail, or is it 10 yards either side of the trail, or is it, a mile either side of the trail? Or is it an entire ecosystem we're trying to preserve here? Because as you'll see, it's a very beautiful trail. And so if you get to the top of the mountain and you look out and all you see are factories and highways, something would be lost, right? So it's just the whole environment began to be considered as something worthy of protection. And in 1968, the National Trails Act was passed, and this idea of a national scenic trail was created. Now there are 11 national scenic trails. We have one in Florida, and the AT was the first of those. So here's some facts. You can see the map on your left. It goes from Georgia up to central Maine. It's 2,193 miles long, goes through 14 states, and it's the longest hiking only footpath in the world. Others are multi-use. This is protected just for hiking. Throughout the trail, there's 464,500 feet of elevation change. And with just the little I've walked on it, I feel like I've done 500,000 of that. It's a lot of up and down, a lot of climbing mountains, if you like that. And it's very popular now. There's over 3 million people who visit the trail every year. I think that's quite a bit up since COVID. There's a lot of people going out there to, again, kind of seek that relief from stress that you get out in a beautiful natural environment. So it's still maintained by volunteers. There's an oversight group, umbrella organization called the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and then in every state there are affiliated Appalachian Trail groups. This area of North Carolina, this is the southwestern, or actually all western North Carolina, is very mountainous, and it's a very special place. The Cherokee Indians inhabit it from 1700 or earlier on, and the Cherokee, as you probably all know, were forcibly removed in 1838 in the famous Trail of Tears. They were farming communities. They were very settled, very, I don't know, modern might be a word compared to what we might think of Indians. They weren't all completely nomadic. They had settled towns, and all of this was disrupted because settlers wanted their land. And you can see a portion of the Trail of Tears in this hike that I'm taking. When we ended up, there's a marker that shows where that trail passed through what is now the Nantahala Outdoor Center. And the Civil War, of course, devastated that area. There were skirmishes between Union and Confederate loyalists. A lot of the people up in the mountains didn't really like the plantation owners down in the lowlands, so they sided with the Union. So there's a lot of back and forth up in the mountains and the balds and the hollers. Then there's intense land speculation following the war, and then copper mining and lumber cutting really destroyed huge tracts of the forest. So part of it was lumber to fuel the smelters for the copper mining. A lot of it was lumber to supply the Navy and merchant marine, because it was all wooden ships at the time. So a lot of this forest got destroyed. It led to a national forest movement to preserve forests. The Nantahala and the Pisgah are national forests that are in that area now. And the trail goes through both of those forests. So the Appalachian Trail in North Carolina is 95 miles in southwestern North Carolina. So that's like pure North Carolina. So I'll show you that map in a minute. And then there's another 224 miles that are right along the North Carolina and Tennessee border. And these are some of the highest elevations on the Appalachian Trail. Clingman's Dome is in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. That's another area that's close to where I'm going to show you, but it's not on the hike that I did. last week. I did it last June, actually. And that's 6,643 feet above sea level. That's the highest peak on the Appalachian Trail. Much of the trail in North Carolina is above 4,000 feet. There's a lot of ups and downs. We call them PUDs, pointless ups and downs. You just get to the top of one mountain and you're going down. So some people like the ups, some people like the downs. They don't like the downs. Some people don't like the downs because it's hard on their knees. Some people don't like the ups because it's a lot of work climbing the mountain. So it doesn't matter, you know, whatever you like or don't like, you're going to get about halvesies of each traversing this trail. And so some people think of New England as a really tough part of the trail. It is, New Hampshire and Maine, but don't ignore Georgia and North Carolina. That's some of the other highest areas of the with the most elevation changes of the AT. So here's a map of the area. If you look at the left, you can see this is southwest North Carolina. And that's the area of that 95 miles. That's all just North Carolina. And then this 224-mile section that just goes right along the border. So I was hiking in that section there, and this inset here on the right shows you a close-up of that area. And then that circle is actually where we went, which was from US 64 near Franklin, if you know where Franklin is. And then we ended up at the Nantahala Outdoor Center, which is near Western North Carolina. And this was our plan. You start over there on the right. We started down here on US 64, like I mentioned. We had several peaks that we crossed. One was Seiler Bald, one was Waya Bald. And then if you go over here to the left, you continue, we went through Rocky Bald and Wesser Bald. So these balds, no one really knows why, but they have little tree cover at the top, or traditionally they did. And that's why they got those names of balds. Some people think it's because of grazing, either Native Americans or the settlers grazed their livestock up there, and that cleared the tops of the mountains. Some people think it's just a natural cause, but no one really knows. But they have tops that don't have trees. Now they're not above the tree line, because the tree line's much higher than this at this latitude. But it gives you really nice views. So what we did is just cross these balds. We had a camp on the first night at Wine Spring. And then we went up to a shelter called Cold Spring Shelter and decided to camp next to it, not in it. And I'll talk about that. And then we went up to another shelter right near the end of our journey called Rufus Morgan Shelter. And then the last day, we just had a mile into town and got our cars and drove back. Here's a picture of the elevation that we covered. So you can see a lot of ups and downs, a lot of elevation. We started at Winding Stair Gap, which is that cross where US 64 crosses near Franklin. That's at 3,688 feet. And we went up to Seiler Bald that first day. So that's a 1,600 foot climb over 3 or 4 miles. And then we go down again. Then we had our camping there the first night. Then the second day we went to Waya Bald, which is 5,000 feet. So as you could see, we traversed a lot of altitude gains and losses. And then the final day, we had this 3,600 foot descent into the Nantahala Gorge, where we ended up. So I'll just give you a little picture show of some of the sites we saw. So again, we started out there, Winding Stair Gap. Here's the entrance from the highway. And we did our ascent, 1,600 feet vertical up to Seiler Bald. Here's some of the outcroppings, some of the views you could see on the way. And we got to Seiler Bald. You could see it's just like a meadow on top of a mountain, and that's why they call it the Bald. So we got up there at mile 4. And then we started going down. So we got down to 4,180 feet, mile 5.9, and we came to this Winding Gap. Again, a little bit of a clearing in the woods. And then we were going back up again. We did an 1,100 foot ascent to Wine Spring, which is where we camped. So that's where we camped that first night. And that was from an elevation of 5,200 feet. So we had a beautiful sunset that night, and it was a nice little campground. Here's a picture of the some of the terrain. So the path is really clear. It's an easy path to follow. There's white blazes, but you don't really even need the blazes. Blazes are marks on a tree. And that was another invention of Myron Avery, was the blaze concept, to mark a trail by a paint mark. And he defined exactly the dimensions of that blaze, and they're kept to this day. So it's an easy trail to follow, but there's a lot of stuff in the way. So you really want to watch your step here with all these roots. This is particularly in North Carolina, tons of roots along the trail. It's great because it helps preserve the trail from erosion, but it's very difficult to walk through. You got to make sure you're not stumbling and falling, because lots of times you got pretty steep drop-offs on the other side. Here's some rocks. There's a lot of rocks and gravel in the path as well. It's really well maintained, but there's not so much you can do about rocks and roots. So that second day, we ended up on Winding Bald, and it's that's pretty high. It's up at 5,300 feet, and that's a bald you can drive to. So it's a kind of pretty thing to get up to. So you can drive up there, and you can see you've got some, a little bit of a, paved footpath. And then there's bathrooms up there and a little bit of signage. And then there's this fire tower. And so you can go up to the fire tower and look out. And because you're on a bald, you got this 360-degree view. And again, just very dramatic. And you're seeing all of the mountains in the Smoky Mountains there. And as you can see, this mist rising from the valley is almost omnipresent in these mountains, and it just gives this very dramatic look. Here it was really just clouds. We were looking down. We were like in an airplane looking down on the clouds. It's totally amazing. It's another view again from the fire tower. And even though it was fall, we had a lot of wildflowers out. It was very colorful. We started to get some fall color as well. So that was really cool. Down from Winding Bald into the Gap again. Had some nice views from there as well. Ended up at this Cold Spring shelter on our second night. And so we took a look at that. This one is really actually built by the CCC. It was fixed up a little bit about 10 years ago, but the shelters are generally pretty crude. This is very crude. There's no platform to put your mat on or anything like that. You're just right on the floor. It holds maybe 5 or 6. And we had a guidebook that said, look, if you go another 1/10 of a mile, there's a really pretty campsite where you can tent. And so we did. Well, first of all, here's Cold Spring. So you see this a lot where they'll put a little PVC pipe and sort of tap off the spring so you can get a better access to it. And you can just put your water container right under it and get your water. Now, all this water is very, very pure, very nice, but we always filter our water or treat it in some way, because you never know what bugs might be in there, bacteria and viruses. So we use filters that filter that material out, or we can treat that water with certain chemicals, or we can just boil it off. So here is that little campground. It was even marked. And so we had to walk up to the top of this bluff, and we pitched our tent up there. It was really nice. And we had a bluff that we could look out from that campsite and had this beautiful view. And in the morning, it faced east, and we had a beautiful sunrise. That's sort of pre-sunrise. And the moon was even still out at that hour. So we had just a really pretty view to sip our coffee to. Here comes the sun, just peeking out from the clouds. Then we continued on that third day. We went to another high point, another bald called Rocky Bald. And that we had to scramble up rocks to get out to. It was sort of a side trail. And here's the views from Rocky Bald. Sorry, 5,000 feet. And here's my crew. And then we went down again to Tellico Gap, and then we had another 1,200 foot ascent to Westerwald. Westerwald is another fire tower. You can see it on the right. I don't know if you can make out the structure there, but it's a steel structure fire tower. And it's like 2 or 3 stories of flights of stairs up, and then you get on the top, and the views are just unbelievable. Very pretty. Again, 360 degrees, looking out on the Smoky Mountains. Then from Westerwald, still going northbound on the trail, there was this nice ridge line. So for once, we weren't going down immediately. So we went across and stayed, level for quite a while. And we had this beautiful vegetation with colors and wildflowers. And on either side of that ridge, you look out and you'd get these incredible views. And a lot of the Appalachian Trail in these parts, like Georgia, North Carolina, particularly in summer, is like walking through a green tunnel. There's just, you can't see out much. And I just really love this section. It's one of those beautiful sections I've been on in the Appalachian Trail, because you really had some views, and the views are just gorgeous, and they're green, and in the mountains and the Blue Mountains, and it's just a really, really special section. So I wanted to share it all with you. So at the end of that ridge is what they call the jump up, or some people call it the jump off, when the trail begins to descend again, but there's this kind of cliff. And at that point of that cliff where that man is standing, you look out and you're just looking completely out into air, into the view. I mean, there's nothing below you. It's all in front of you. And it's just these amazing views from here. So we were lucky. We had really good weather, great visibility every day to see this beautiful trail. So then from there, we went down. So anyone with hurting knees got hurt even worse. We went 3,600 feet down, and you can see some of the incline here and some of the grade on these trails. It was pretty steep coming down. So we finally got down to the Nantahala Outdoor Center, or NOC, at 1,727 feet. That was completing our hike at 27.5 miles. So the Nantahala Outdoor Center is really cool place. We stayed there the first night before we had someone shuttle us down to Winding Stair Gap. And so they've got like a hostel there where you can stay. A lot of people come there for training. They have EMT training there. There was a group there while we were there. Mainly their business is doing outfitting for kayaking and training for kayaking, and also kayak tours. And so there's a restaurant there, this River's End. Here's the river that runs right through it, the Nantahala River. There's this adventure center where you sign up for your training. There's a general store. There's an outfitter where you can get all your gear. There's a bar. And there's the big sign, and we're posing right next to that big sign for the NOC. So that's my presentation tonight. Appreciate you coming. Glad I could share with you.